what has been in the past the tradition in Colombia in these types of transitions. This week, we had the wonderful news that the War Crimes Tribunal has begun operating, and there are already over 7,000 alleged war crimes criminals who have put themselves in the process, and many more will be expected as things move on, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll start seeing some of the hearings. Also exciting is the fact that the judges chosen to take on this enormous task of figuring out which cases and what to do with the information that they receive are mostly women, and it's also one of the most diverse group of judges you've ever seen in Colombian histories. So while this is all very wonderful and something we should continue to support and make sure that it's sustainable in the long term, we know that challenges remain. The first one is sustaining this momentum towards peace post-August 2018, especially given the elections that we saw this past Sunday. The elections were really smooth compared to other elections in Colombia. There was really no violence. There were protests and there were problems due to lack of tarjetones on the consultations, and that was problematic, but it was not anything life-threatening. We have also a clearer panorama of what the Colombian electorate is thinking about in terms of the presidential race and how the new Congress is going to play into the peace process. So obviously, Iván Duque was the candidate that won overall, and then Gustavo Petro was the all-out winner for the left. However, we see that in the House and in the Senate, while technically the majority of the parties are parties that have voted in favor of the peace process, it's by a very slim margin. And so given all the difficulties that we've had in the past year with the special jurisdiction for peace and with the fast track process, this is going to be something that's going to require a lot of monitoring and a lot of pushing to move forward. It was sad to see that Uribe, while he has lost some popularity, remains extremely popular. He was the most voted senator. And, you know, it shows that the politics of revenge, the politics of scapegoating Venezuela, the politics of you're with us or you're against us, continue to get a lot of people in Colombia to vote in his favor. We also saw that the Green Party, especially Mocos, but others, really expanded their reach, which shows a ray of hope that many Colombians feel that politics as usual isn't the way to go, but efforts that really combat corruption is the way. So it was also amazing that the FARC political party was able to participate, although its main candidates in the end have decided not to continue. And they are actually debating things politically and nonviolently, which is great. Now, it also shows that they don't have a lot of support. They only got like 1% of the vote. So aside from the curules that have been assigned to them, you know, they're not going to be much of a force in terms of politics. And I also think it's important, though, that this happened because it also counters the argument from some of the center-right saying that Colombia is in danger of becoming a Castro-Chavista country, and that with the turmoil in Venezuela, this is a big risk, including our own Senator Rubio this past week in Colombia. Far more still needs to happen for Colombia to have a truly pluralistic political, most directly affected by conflict, those less affected more directly by conflict remains and is still very present. So a lot of work will be needed, and a lot of work is going to be needed not just to push with the FARC Accord, but also to keep the momentum going with the ELN Accord that had some positive breakthroughs this week. Other challenges are other illegal armed groups, and another big one is the risk of the U.S. beginning to pressure Colombia to go back to the wrong policy directions and reverting back to a militarized form of addressing its problems. We now have a new nominee for Secretary of State, And Trump is going to Colombia after the Summit of the Americas, so we'll see what sort of messages they'll be given. Luckily, there continues to be an overall bipartisan consensus in support of peace. However, this could shift given the continued growth of coca cultivation, and if a anti-peace candidate wins in Colombia and decides to radically change direction and gets the U.S. to go along with that, that could be an issue. Another problem that we're seeing is that Trump's budget to the House, we can go ahead and have a discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jimena, for the presentation, for the invitation. I wanted to be on the ground, being with the social leaders, with the communities, and with the human rights defenders. Maybe as well mentioning that we have a constant interlocution, constant meetings with civilian and military authorities all over the country, especially where we are working in the regions, as well as on a national level, which means we have meetings with military brigades, with the Ombudsman's office, with the Ministry of Interior, and which is once in a while even funny, because we have meetings with generals from the military brigades, which are they insist that there are no paramilitary groups or even neo-paramilitary groups anymore operating in the region. And yeah, we saw them 2 days ago, like 500 meters passing by. So yes, the situation of the human rights defenders. You all know last November 24th, it was the first anniversary of the signing of the peace agreement. Basically, according to official numbers, since then, every 48 hours has been killed human rights defenders and social leaders. I insist that this is the official number. Probably the real number is much higher. An international organization, Frontline Defenders, they recently declared Colombia to be the most dangerous country for the activity of defending human rights because of not only the killings, but as well the physical attacks, the defamations, the death threats. That means the current situation is not very encouraging for the activity of defending human rights. It's a terrible message to those people, and especially to victims and victims' organizations, which try to support the implementation of the peace agreement. We can see right now basically three main points which are critical for human rights defenders, which is firstly the protection measures offered by the Colombian state. We see on a daily basis that these protection measures are not enough. They are not. They are definitely insufficient. There's a big lack of territorial approach, gender-based approach, an ethnic approach, which means, for example, that we have a gender-based approach. We have a mother whose son has been killed in the Montes de Maria region. She's a peasant farmer, around 75 years old, and she receives as a protection measure a bulletproof jacket. So it's very hot over there, to start with that. And secondly, she can't she can't put it on because it's too heavy for her. So usually these protection measures initially start with a panic button, and as well with cell phones. Then there is another level which includes armed cars, bodyguards, non-armed bodyguards and armed bodyguards. We are working, for example, with women organization of lawyers in the Bucaramanga and the Norte de Santander and Santander department. They have male bodyguards because of their high risk and their death threats. They don't want to travel with these bodyguards because they don't feel safe. They asked a couple of times the special unit, the special protection unit, which is linked to the Ministry of Interior, if it's possible to have female bodyguards, but yeah, it's not possible right now. Another example is, for example, we are working together with a social leader in the Puerto Gaitan municipality in the Meta department. Usually the bodyguards, they don't receive enough money to travel with them to different regions, which means that the human rights defenders travels by bus 8 hours to Villavicencio, afterwards to Bogota in order to attend a meeting. In the meantime, the bodyguard and the armed car stays at the finca. In addition to that, a lot of human rights organizations and communities we are working with not only have special protection measures from the Colombian state, they even have special protection measures issued by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, or even the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I would like to share the specific case of the peace community of San José de Apartado, which is a peasant community located in the San José de Apartado, which is in the northern part of Antioquia. It's a community of about 500, 600 persons. They declared themselves as a peace community in 1997 during the internal armed conflict. They don't allow arms, guns, for example. They don't allow armed actors in the communities, which means they don't want to have communication or they don't want to be in touch with guerrilla members, paramilitary members, but even state force members. Unfortunately, they have a large list of severe crimes against humanity, severe human rights violations, including forced disappearances via sexual abuses, killings, massacres. And because of the situation, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ordered special protection measures for them starting, I think, in 2000. Since then, they have suffered at least around 330 killings, at least 6 massacres, a special massacre which took place in February of 2005, where in a joint military and paramilitary operation, 7 members of the community has been killed. 3 of them were minors. One of them was a baby with, I think, 11 months. We had 11 months. Immediately after this massacre, the former president, Álvaro Uribe Vélez, declared that this was perpetrated by the FARC guerrilla. I think 3 years after, they could prove that this definitely was a joint military-paramilitary operation where the 17th Military Brigade had a special role. Until now, there are only 5 soldiers investigated and sanctioned. They are in jail. But yeah, this is one of the examples for impunity. But I want to go back to the protection measures. During the whole last year, we alerted about the security risk of this community. So there was a special resolution issued by the Inter-American Court ordering the Colombian government to take measures against the situation. They had a public hearing in San Jose de Costa Rica in November. Nevertheless, the community published in the second week of December that paramilitary groups, together with the 17th Military Brigade, are planning to attack against the leaders. And this attack took place on December 29th. So, which means that also they have a long history of human rights violation. They have special protection measures from the Colombian state. They have the special protection measures from the Inter-American Court. It's not possible to stop right now or to block these attacks. In general, we have seen recently that human rights organizations, which historically have received death threats, defamations, stigmatizations, suffer now physical attacks. This is not only the peace community, it's as well, for example, a female organization in the Meta department, which is called Assassinated. They are victims from the Mapedipan massacre, which took place in 1997, as well a joint paramilitary operation. A lot of them are still outside of the municipality. They couldn't go back because of the security situation. They are land claimants under the 1448 law, which is a special law of land restitution and victims' rights. Nevertheless, as there is no special gender approach towards the protection measures, they couldn't go back to their land until now. And the legal representative of the organization has suffered a physical attack in the last week of November. She has as well protection measures offered by the special protection unit of the Ministry of Interior, but only during the day. So the physical attack took place at 8 p.m. The second issue I wanted to address is the impunity rates, which are tremendously high all over the country. Also, there are strong efforts from the new special unit of investigation and in the General Attorney's Office. The special unit of investigation is part of the third chapter of the peace agreement. But, well, they have a new director since December. So I think it's very difficult to talk about results and new information of criminal cases, for example, against the authors. The impunity is tremendously high, especially regarding the cases where there has been a state responsibility towards the human rights violations, which means extrajudicial killings, for example, perpetrated by military forces. We are talking right now about 4,700 cases. This is not only a special concern of the human rights organizations. During the last 6 months, there has been 2 visits of the General Attorney of the International Criminal Court to Colombia, the last, I think, last week. They are tremendously worried about the justice towards these extrajudicial killings, there are 29 high-ranking officers of the Colombian army in the focus of the International Criminal Court, which is definitely good news, because it's important not only to investigate the human rights violations perpetrated by paramilitary groups, by guerrilla groups, but especially we think there's state responsibilities in these human rights violations, because this is the only possibility to really guarantee the victims' rights towards truth, justice and reparation, and hopefully will create guarantees for non-repetition of these human rights violations. And thirdly, the third concern we have is right now what Jimena just mentioned. It's the presidential election, it's the political campaign, which started officially last Sunday. And the support towards the implementation of the peace agreement. Right now, there are a couple of presidential candidates which are not necessarily supportive towards the peace agreement. They publicly already announced that, there is a peace agreement, but if they win, that does not necessarily mean that they will support it actively. Especially, obviously, the candidate of the Centro Democrático, which is Iván Duque, which is basically the stepson of Álvaro Uribe Vélez, who did everything until now, who has tried to do everything to block the implementation of the peace agreement. The other candidate is Vargas Lleras, which is the former vice president under the Santos administration, former Ministry of Interior, former transportation minister, as far as I remember. And also he, has not publicly attacked the implementation of the peace agreement, but it's very well known that he's not very supportive either. Yeah, I think this is kind of short overview of the situation.
Do you want to give us any recommendations on what we can do before we go to discussion?
I think it's definitely very important to support any kind of protection measures towards the human rights defenders. It's in generally very important to support the implementation of the peace agreement. I think this was a historical event which took place in Colombia. Definitely it's not easy. There are no easy solutions. It won't work from one day to another. But it's very important for the victims' organization that they have the guarantee that there is a different situation for them, that they have the possibility to have protection for the rights. So we think public support towards the implementation of the peace agreement is definitely very important. To ask the Colombian government is basically to ask as well the U.S. government, who has a big, how do you say that? The U.S. assistance toward the Colombian government, that they really should focus on human rights, on guarantees for the participation of victims' organization in the peace agreement, especially in the special jurisdiction for peace. And that the U.S. assistance is not only going to the military sector, but as well to the social sector, and to support once again, the situation of human rights defenders, social leaders, human rights organizations, to ask the same thing towards the Colombian government. To ask, for example, Congress members to travel to Colombia. This is very important, not only to travel to Bogota, but as well to travel to affected conflict zones, to visit victims' organizations, rural communities, to go to the Afro-Colombian communities in the Bajo Atrato region. To visit, for example, family members of recent killed social leaders. We have two cases in the Bajo Atrato region where the family right now, they are forcibly displaced because they can't go back to their fincas, to the territory, because there are no guarantees. This would be very important as well.
Okay. One question before we go on to the audience. I understand that there was a decree that was basically announced for collective measures, and that's been an issue that for many years many have been advocating for. What can you tell us about that decree and where it is?
Well, I think the first decree was issued in 2015 towards towards the collective measures. Until now, as far as we understood, there are like 15, 17 cases of communities which received collective measures. We definitely think that this is not enough, considering the high number of communities at risk right now. They announced a new decree. I haven't seen it, honestly. I think Santos made a public statement like 2-3 days ago. 2 weeks ago, they sent out a draft of this new decree. I think one of the big challenges in Colombia is always there are a lot of institutions, there are a lot of decrees, there are a lot of... But there's always a big difference of what is written on the paper and what is happening on the ground. So definitely we support a possible new decree. I don't know if it's public already. I haven't seen it, honestly. We have to check it firstly in order to give our opinion about that. Okay. Definitely, we think it's important, it's necessary, it's very urgent. But once again, we have seen it, for example, with the new decree of the, how do you say that? Las alertas tempranas from the Ombudsman Office. System, exactly. Yeah. So there was a new decree, there has been a new decree last December, which gave more autonomy basically to the Defensoría, to the Ombudsman Office. Nevertheless, the whole implementation is in charge of the Ministry of Interior. So only in January, the Ombudsman Office issued 19 alertas de acción, special alerts, security alerts, towards the situation of rural communities, Afro-Colombian communities, indigenous communities, and so on. And the Ministry of Interior, they can't cope with the amount of action of alertas de acción. So we hope that this won't happen with this new decree as well. But definitely it's important.
Yeah, great. Great, well, thank you. I just want to open it up for the floor. If people could just introduce themselves before you make a question or a comment, so Petra knows who's asking.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you could clear up a little bit what these collective measures and decrees are. I didn't quite catch.
With regarding this new decree,
or what a collective measure is generally. I might be a little behind.
The collective measures. Usually, as I mentioned in the beginning, the protection measures offered by the Colombian government are individual, which means that every leader, well, beginning they receive a panic button, they receive a cell phone, or they receive bulletproof jackets, the next level then an armed car, bodyguards. So this is one leader of a community. Usually there are a lot of leaders. Usually the most vulnerable part of the leaders are the families, because they are like the targets of death threats, physical attacks, and so on. Because if you want to really to attack a leader, you go after his wife, his children, and so on. For example, the ethnic approach. Probably Jimena knows even more about that than me. But the Afro-Colombian communities usually they live far away from like the bigger cities, so they need special kind of transportation. For example, boats. They need special collective measures, not only for one leader, but maybe. Kind of measures which allow them to communicate in between, because usually they don't live together at one finca or at one special point. They live far away in different areas, so they have to communicate.
Another example of a collective measure would be in one of these remote communities, having some kind of generator to be able to have electricity, to be able to light like the main street or certain areas where something could happen more easily if it's under the cover of darkness. So usually collective measures try to address a broader group of people rather than one individual, precisely because of what Petra said, that often it's not just the one person targeted, but their community and their family members to get at the person. Other comments? Yeah.
I think Lisa, and afterwards.
Okay, if you could just introduce yourself, please. Lisa.
Lisa Howard, Latin American Working Group. Can you talk a little bit more about current Colombian government responses, like what the Inspector General is doing and the Attorney General? We talked a bit about the Defensor del Pueblo. And also, could you say, have you seen a difference in the way the U.S. Embassy and U.S. government is responding to threats against human rights defenders in Colombia, or is it the same as it's been?
Well, the Santos administration, the position of the Santos administration, that definitely has been a change. In comparison, for example, to former years to the Uribe administration, which means that there are new members of government which, takes position towards the protection of human rights defenders, especially the new inspectors general, procurador, which is a former Minister of Interior. He started beginning last year. He issued a new decree towards the protection of human rights defenders. He had, I think, an important role as well during the civil strike in Buenaventura, in the port city. He definitely supported 25 threatened leaders from the Bajo Atrato region after the two killings of Mario Castaño y Hernán Bedoya, which took place between November and December. And I think as well the role of the Ombudsman, of the General Defensor Nacional, is important to mention. For example, it's the first time that a Defensor Nacional visited the peace community of San José de Apartado, which I was talking about before, in order to support them, in order to receive testimonies, which before probably wouldn't have happened. This is a positive result. Nevertheless, we have, for example, the position of the Minister of Defense, which reacted directly after a positive pronouncement statement of the Procurador. The day after, he said, no, the whole story of killing human rights defenders is due to romantic affairs, struggles between neighbors and so on. There is no, there is no political reason behind that, which is obviously not very helpful. I think Santos could definitely take a position to support publicly human rights defenders, a stronger position towards that. Nevertheless, I heard yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, he did a public statement regarding the new decree of collective measures. I haven't heard it because I was here in meetings, but it's a first step. It's a first step. It's important, but I think there is still a lot to do. It's important to send positive messages, especially because he is basically he's the head of the government. He negotiated this peace agreement, so it's important that he will do it. And yes, second question: the U.S. Embassy. U.S. Embassy. Yes, as you may know, there has been a hearing of a new ambassador for the U.S. Embassy in Bogota. In comparison to former years, I think it's necessary to say that they lost a little bit the track. They lost their connection with human rights organizations, with rural communities. I know that in former times, for example, they traveled a lot. They had meeting in the office of human rights organization in order to show their support. This hasn't happened so much lately.
Okay.
I think, you, and afterwards you.
I'm Lindsay Moran from Environmental Investigation Agency. I was just wondering if you have a sense in these cases if media attention, particularly international media attention, either amplifies the problem for defenders or makes them safer? Or does it just depend case by case?
I think international media attention is very important. Obviously, it depends always on the case, and it depends as well on the focus of the media attention. But definitely, I think international attention is important because it's a message for the Santos government, the Santos administration, that their people are interested, governments are interested, international organizations are interested. And especially the situation of environmental human rights defenders right now in Colombia is absolutely terrible. There was a report at the end of the year issued by Global Witness. I think Colombia is the second worst country for environmental human rights defenders, especially regarding the impunity. And we are working with a couple of human rights organizations dealing with this issue, and I think international attention is very important. Cristina.
Okay, I don't have a question. I want to say something that sometimes it's very difficult for us here, sitting in Washington, D.C., to visualize the very, very difficulties that the communities has in these regions. Because even though they receive a cellular, many times they don't receive sun, they cannot use the cellular phone. They have computer, but they cannot use the media like we can here in other parts of Colombia. And you have to see the very, very difficult situation of these leaders because they are very isolated there. These protective measures are not enough for them.
I think, Andrew, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Or comment?
Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Miller. I'm with Amazon Watch, and I was on the Peace Brigades team in 1989 and 2000 in the Uruguay region. Anyway, thank you very much for your presentation. Excellent synthesis, and yours also, Jimena. I'm interested in the question of environmental issues and just kind of there's been a certain amount of conversation here, like Inter-American Dialogue, I think they just issued a report on the issue of kind of what's the environmental panorama in the post-conflict sort of scenario in Colombia. And obviously we're very concerned about one of the potential negative impacts of the peace process being that it essentially opens up huge areas of Colombia to industrial scale extraction, roads, and different kinds of concessions, et cetera. So I'm very curious, and of course there's all kinds of social conflicts around dams, amongst many other issues, the palm oil issue. I know the Environmental Investigation Agency has done some work on that. So I guess my question is just about kind of, in terms of PBI and the organizations that Peace Brigades is accompanying currently, to what degree are you working with organizations and accompanying groups that are doing and pushing forward different kinds of environmental issues and potentially, running into problems because they're butting up against major economic and political issues?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Maybe I can talk about two specific examples, which is once again the Bajo Atrato region in Urabá, where the two killings against the land claimants leaders took place, and as well the Maperipan municipality, where a big international company is operating right now. The two killings of these two land claimants leader is definitely linked to environmental issues, to commercial operations, because these leaders were forcibly displaced during a joint paramilitary operation in 1997. When they came back, they found out that their land was full with banana crops, palm oil crops, coca crops as well. And so they had to start struggling against big economic interests. So, and once again, although there are a couple of court rulings or court orders towards that the issue that the land belongs to these communities, especially the case of Mario Castaño y Hernán Bedoya, they are still operating in the region. With the whole environmental impact, but as well with direct impacts on political and civil rights. Because we have, for example, the case of Hernán Bedoya, who was killed on December 8. The collective territory is occupied by a national company, Agromar, which is a palm oil company, as far as I remember. They, according to testimonies, they are linked to drug trafficking issues. In not only talking about environmental effects, because they cut, how do you say that? plantas protegidas in the like protected plants, part of the rainforest, which is in these territories, in order to grow palm oil plants. The case of Mapadipan is the same story, basically, that a lot of the land, which is basically property of different peasant communities, is full with palm oil plants, which has a negative impact on environmental because it's a monocultivo. We are not specifically accompanying right now environmental human rights organizations. Nevertheless, for example, we have a close relationship to Rios Vivos, the case of the dam in Ituango, which is once again as well linked to civil and political human rights violations because they try to flood right now a big river basin, where is evidence that there are fosas comunes. My brain stops working. Graves with people forcibly disappeared during the conflict.
I just wanted to add on that point. In November, I was in the Choco region, and Choco still has a long way to go in becoming really a post-conflict situation because of the ELN activity as well as the different paramilitary groups. However, the greatest fear that you hear from different community leaders is, as things get better, the pressure to push large-scale projects, especially mining and so forth, where the battles have always been who controls the subsoil, are going to basically gain ground. And so there's already a huge environmental problem from the illegal mining, which led to this decision by the court of the Rio Atrato, basically naming the Rio Atrato as basically an entity that needed to be protected, and all of its people in the whole situation basically there, which included protection of leaders. I mean, the protection of Afro-Colombian indigenous basically is one and the same as environmental protection because of their way of life and so forth. And so that's something that we've been hearing from absolutely everyone in terms of indigenous and Afro-Colombians. And I just want to mention with that situation that while the ethnic chapter was very positive because it upholds the right to previous consultation, we still see that previous consultation is a right that's not fully exercised in Colombia. And with the pressures of the free trade agreements, that has gotten worse. And so there's been efforts to curtail that right by limiting it to sort of an administrative, you have to meet with the indigenous, that's it, but not doing more than that so they can check off the box. And there are also been efforts to really push forward how to go into territories where perhaps the collective land rights are not completely defined yet, especially when it comes to Afro-Colombians like in Cauca and in other regions where it's so I think that's a huge issue. It's a very problematic issue. In the case of Choco, you're seeing that the mercury poisoning from the mining operations, it has this multiple collateral effect of from human health to destroying crops, then just the moving of the subsoil for the gold mining leads to huge holes that then small-scale gold miners, which is the traditional mining, women end up getting subsumed by the waters just because of that. And then the salinization of the changes in the soil is leading to a destruction of fisheries. So often, this you heard a lot in Choco for a while, but it's gotten far worse. Certain types of species that were normally gotten by people are either not available or very little available, or they have to go really, really far, which is very difficult if you're a local river community living person in there, because first you have to go through different checkpoints of different illegal armed groups. But more than that, if you go beyond the canoe and use a more fast boat, the fuel is incredibly expensive. So it's affecting the whole livelihood of folks. It has that effect. The indigenous people from the Ethnic Commission have prioritized this issue as the environmental issue, and it's something that they're trying to very much find further safeguards for, mostly fighting it through all of the efforts to undermine the previous consultation. But definitely the current in that direction is pretty strong.
Maybe only to add, in general, like the environmental legislation in Colombia is pretty weak. It's not according to the recommendation of the international standards in the first place, and the existing legislation is definitely weak. And if there are court orders regarding, for example, the protection of environmental issues, usually this doesn't take place. Secondly, well, you have this power clash, obviously, between international companies with an enormously, tremendously high budget and the local communities. And usually these international communities offer so much to the Colombian state that the guarantee of the rights of the communities or the interest of the communities from a territorial perspective isn't respected. As well, the phenomenon of the, I'm not sure how you say that, the revolving doors. For example, a lot of members of the Uribe administration after the elections passed directly to international companies, especially these members who worked with Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, with El Ministerio de Minas, with a lot of information about the different territories in Colombia.
So we're going to have to close, so why don't we take a quick round of these 4 questions and then you answer short. So let's start here.
Thank you. Catalina Martinez from the Environmental Investigation Agency. Two quick questions. How can nonprofit organizations here in DC prepare in case of Iván Duque wins? How to work again under a very right-wing government, especially when we have all these human rights issues? How do we do it? Because there's
I think we need something stronger.
and also connected to answer this question. So this treaty for environmental defenders was signed 10 days ago in Costa Rica.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we should push or at least do some kind of lobby to have the ratification of that? Like, could be this another mechanism to protect people, or this is just another legal mechanism that won't work? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's take the other questions and then you'll.
Okay.
So I don't see behind.
Hi, my name is Maha. I work at the National Democratic Institute. I have questions tied, I guess, to the Colombian democracy, and it's a heavy one, so. But my question is just broad. Given that we have had the congressional election, you kind of have more of an idea of what the country's going to look like, except we don't know who the president's going to be, right? So it's a big thing that we're waiting for. Who do you think is going to be who do you think would be the candidate that would be most helpful toward the peace accords? And what do you think his chances of winning are?
Okay.
Hi.
Yeah.
Julio Patiño, also from EIA. I've seen that some of the measures seem to be after the fact of that some attacks or some threats have passed. I don't know if some organizations of you have some protocol in mind to protect not after the fact, but to try to, example, engage some agribusiness or paramilitary to do a preemptive protection of the stakeholders or the actors there that are protecting the environment.
Okay, and the last one.
Yes, maybe it's related to that. I am Mariela. I'm interning in Sejin, Center for Justice and International Law. And my question is like, I know that there is this initiative towards a protocol to approach specifically threats, la esperanza. But my question was about this last decrees of the Ministry of Interior last year. There was like something in December that creates like this system of alerts and quick action
with the Ombudsman
with
office.
with the Ombudsman and the Ministry, and it's like a lot of it creates like this articulated system with a lot of offices and bureaucracy. But for me, it looks like a lot of bureaucracy, and I wanted to know which is your opinion about that last decree and like this idea of integral policy in contrast with the last recommendation of the Commission of Human Rights, the last report that the Commission of Human Rights issued about like public policies to protect human rights defenders. They asked for these integral policies, and I'm not sure if these kind of things that the Ministry of Interior did looks like that.
Okay, I start. The first question, I think, independent which candidate will win, it's important to support the implementation of the peace agreement. I think, like, the international attention towards Colombia is always very helpful. I think, well, we as PBI won't support a special candidate or reject another candidate. We are interested that there is a real democratic system. This is the most important thing. And we support the respect of human rights, the implementation of the treaties signed and ratified by Colombia, and definitely one of the requests which are very important is, for example, that the Colombian state ratifies the treaty. Not only this treaty, we think every treaty protecting human rights is important. So, second question, the same thing. We are not able, we won't take a public position towards, this candidate is ideal, the other one is no, it doesn't work. I think this is what Colombia has right now, and independent of the outcome or the result of the presidential election, it's important that the future president support the peace agreement, will respect the spirit, the original spirit of the peace agreement, and won't try to reduce it, and definitely will keep on working of creating a safe environmental for especially rural and ethnic communities. Previous protection. I think it's once in a while it's so like it sounds generally, but respecting human rights would be a good measure to protect human rights organizations. We think there are Colombia has an excellent constitution, a lot of legislation. There are a large number of court rulings towards the protection of human rights, and it's important to implement them, to respect them. This would be the perfect prevention of everything. The Ombudsman, same thing. We I think it's important to keep on working of different kind of approaches towards protection measures, especially with a gender-based approach, territorial focus, ethnic focus, and we can't say right now after like 2 months if it will work with a new decree that the Ministry of Interior issued. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, what we've seen over the years is that regardless what decree or institution is in place, because they're constantly changing or morphing or what have you, the political protection, the political attention, the demand from the outside that such and such a person, X doesn't happen to them, or that there be justice in the situation tends to work the most. And so I think from the United States, I think the biggest type of prevention support that could be given is continued assistance to Colombia on the human rights and peace front, because that not only is direct assistance, and of course it's not enough, but it's something that leads to engagement between the two countries on these broader issues, and allows for some room of opportunity to protect people. So I want to thank Petra so much for taking the time to be with us and for sharing her insights. We will be continuing to work, obviously, on all of these issues moving forward. And just to mention that on March 25th, next Sunday, we're going to have an afternoon conference on Afro-Latinos and the situation of rights of Afro-Latinos, Haitians, and African descendants in the Americas. One part will be regional, given the Summit of the Americas. The other part, and the situation in Colombia, we'll have 3 different Afro-Colombian leaders speak. And also another part is here, especially in DC. We have invited the mayor's office. As you all know, the TPS issue, the DACA issue also affects African descendant migrants, and it affects them in particular ways. The removal of TPS for Haitians is still a major problem. It's a problem for all of them, but it's been an issue that has caused congestion at the border with Canada. It's not being dealt with very well in the region. So anyway, invite all of you to watch out for our announcement and to come and join us. Again, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. I mean, it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then we'll have those crazy